Let's bring in former Deputy Director of National Intelligence, Kash Patel, and Fox News contributor and Washington Times opinion editor, Charlie Hurt. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. So, Charlie, Dagan and I, before the show, we're debating whether it's a good idea to have cameras in the courtroom. Charlie, what is your take? Cameras in or out, yes or no?
Well, for entertainment value, I would enjoy it. But the really remarkable thing here is I think this reveals everything you need to know about all of this. This has nothing to do with justice. This has everything to do with politics and a message. And, it's kind of interesting listening to these Democrats talk about how they want cameras in the courtroom for all of this. And by the way, they're taking an official House congressional stance on this issue. They got together and wrote a letter to the D.C. courts asking that this be done, which is just kind of astonishing if you stop and think about it. But for the first time, this is the only way these people are relevant. And listening to, it's like Nancy Pelosi has been wandering through the desert for 2 years now because, without Donald Trump, they're completely irrelevant. They have no answers to any of the things that actually matter to the American people, like borders, gas prices, inflation, world peace, any of those things. And the answers that they do come up with make all of those things worse. So all they have to do is run on this nonsense. And I think the American people see right through it.
Kash, exactly. And even in this Wall Street Journal editorial, sometimes I agree with them, but they go off and say toward a 2024 campaign debate about a sitting president's age and family business. They treat the American people like they can't think about multiple things at one time. And if the trials are televised, that, they won't be able to think about anything else but the trial that's on the TV.
Look, hey, it's great to be with you guys, and that's a pretty good summary of how the mainstream media is going to handle this case. And as a former national security prosecutor and federal public defender, I agree with the sanctity of the courtroom. You should allow both sides, the prosecution and the defense, to represent their cases fairly. Now, in this weird universe that we find ourselves in now, the only advantage, and maybe to turn the tables on the Democrats about actually publicizing any of this, by the way, I don't think it's ever going to happen. But the only advantage is the American public and the world will see it. And the Democrats won't be able to put on their disinformation campaigns like they do with congressional hearings when they piecemeal together information that's false and tell you that Russia is actually in bed with Donald Trump when he never was, or that Joe Biden is not in bed with the Chinese Communist Party when he is. And so that would be the only advantageous point of this, but it would destroy federal judiciary process along the way. So the Democrats are just looking for a punching bag. By the way, it was funny for me to see Nancy Pelosi in her Hollywood video of the January 6th, where she said she wanted to slug Donald Trump in the face. This is the person that's telling the world we should be watching her.
I think the liberal media wants to be consumed with whether it's 6 months or 6 weeks or 2 months of coverage of a Donald Trump trial, as opposed to all the things that are happening in the country. It gives them an excuse not to cover it. But after all these years, liberal elites, they still can't figure out why Trump has such appeal. A New York Times columnist, he took a stab at it. He asked, what if we're the bad guys here? The writer David Brooks includes himself as a member of this class and is a self-ascribed anti-Trumper. On the latest indictments, he says, quote, the Trump indictments seem like just another skirmish in the class war between the professionals and the workers, another assault by a bunch of coastal lawyers who want to take down the man who most aggressively stands up to them. Of course, the indictments don't cause Trump supporters to abandon him. They cause them to become more fiercely loyal. Charlie, I thought this was an interesting piece that David Brooks, a liberal, by the way, he came away with a lot of wrong conclusions, but that he actually took a step into going, hey, maybe we're the bad guys. Maybe we're the cause of all of this discontent in America. And maybe that's why middle America loves Donald Trump.
Yeah, no, exactly. And these people will never understand Donald Trump or the people that support him.
Right.
The reason people love Donald Trump is because they love their country. And Donald Trump is the first politician to come along in decades on the national stage and stick up for their country. That's why they love Donald Trump. And these people at the New York Times will never understand that. David Brooks, of course, used to be conservative, which is kind of funny, the idea that you'd have a conservative at the New York Times. You have to be a really stupid person if the New York Times is going to let you write for them as a conservative, because they would never let the days of William Safire are long gone because, of course, the New York Times is a trash newspaper. David Brooks and the rest of them, they're bigots. If you read that story, he talks about how MAGA is somehow wants to bring back like segregation or slavery or something like that. Make America great again. If David Brooks thinks "Make America Great Again" is talking about bringing back slavery, that says all you need to know about those people, not the rest of these people, not the people who support Donald Trump, who are the true MAGA people, but these people at the New York Times, and David Brooks is one of them. He's a bigot. They segregate the entire world by race. And that's the only way they can look at people. They don't look at people as individuals. They see them as a race or whatever their group is. And, and it's why they're a ridiculous newspaper, and he's a ridiculous man.
I looked at this, Kash, this piece as kind of a Jeffrey Toobin-like exercise. And I don't mean a long book about O.J. It is an exercise in self-absorption and self-indulgence, and it's not reformative. It's meant as nothing but something to make all these elitist jerks feel good about themselves. And at the end of it, he says, Trump's a monster and he deserves to go to prison. So how do you see it?
Look, it's arrogance and hypocrisy to a new level. In the first paragraph, this author at the New York Times cites some university of wokeness and says that the Republican Party is actually racist because they don't want to include minorities. The last I checked, I was a minority. Last I checked, Donald Trump appointed this brown guy as the first deputy director of national intelligence in U.S. history. Last I checked, Donald Trump appointed me as a chief of staff, first minority in U.S. history. Obama didn't do that. Clinton didn't do that. Bush didn't do that. The MAGA movement did it because it puts forward you not based on your color of your skin or your creed, but on whether or not you can get the job done for the American public. So when I read that asinine line from this New York reporter, it's just pompous arrogance, and they're attempting to appeal to the masses, and they're totally failing.
What if we're the bad? It's like, what if we're the bad guys? We're not the bad guys. That's basically
they're the race.
The only difference between David Brooks and Jeffrey Toobin is that David Brooks' piece was edited and it wasn't an accident.
Kash Patel, Charlie Hurt, thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate it.